Okay. Hi everyone. My name is Doyin. I'm a PGY3 resident in New York here. And when Edward was
Don't you know they use PGY to tension us? Calm down.
yeah, I don't hear. Okay. So when Edward was introduced, he said senior brother. Me, I know the senior brother. We are brothers, like same level. Anyways, but it's always
In medicine,
we
we
are one big
respect
family.
hierarchy.
We
That's
are we are one big family. We go a long way back, so I'm grateful to God for where we are today. And yeah, Tobe is my brother. We have so many
Junior brother. That one certainly.
whatever. Not that junior. But anyways, yeah, to the matter of today, as much as we will like to have fun, we'll also learn from the deep and will I say extensive wealth of knowledge that Edwards has and has been engaged in over the years. I mean, these things don't come by talent. They come by practice. I mean, of course, the talent would have to be like on the background. We all on this call are brilliant people. There is a selection process that brought us all into this stage that we are. So, but in addition to that, applying ourselves is something that comes over time, and there are benefits that come with it, and that is the wealth of knowledge that we are about to get from Edwards today. So I'll be co-moderating with Tobe, and today, I mean, in summary, we're going to talk about research, but of course, as we all know, we do research for different reasons, advance your career, curiosity, advance medical practice, and so on and so forth. But for every activity, there are rules. And remember that the reason there are rules is because things have happened in the past that were undesirable or that were concerning, and then they came up with different sort of guidelines and stuff to make sure that things are done proper way. So I know Edward is going to go into the depths of all of that with us today. So for all of us that are already in research, we know some of these things, but I think it will give us more information. And for those of us that are just starting, to be a good learning opportunity to actually know what goes into what happens in the background before you see that paper that you're reading and before the article that you're reading. So because I'm not the speaker today, so I'll shut up right now so that the main man, he can take the podium. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, and welcome to this conversation. In fact, the way I want to drive this conversation is it's going to be more of semi-formal presentation, semi-interjections from the moderator, so that we can have, out of the niche. My goal is to bring the conversation to as simple as possible, so we can all get to understand what is going on. The topic today is ethical considerations in research. Before you embark on research, there are a couple of things important for you to do. Give me a second, I need to set this. The mode. Okay, yes, I've sent it. So there are a couple of things that you need to do in research. One of them is to know the process. Where do I even start from? What are the types of research and what are the laws that govern it? There are lots of laws, several principles that govern them. One of them is the ethical nature of clinical research. I don't want to go into types of research, prospective, retrospective. Let me keep that for another conversation. This conversation is what drives me? What is the ethical rules that I need to keep when I'm doing a research? And before we could go into the ethical rules that I need to keep in my research, give me one moment. Okay. This is a brief outline of my agenda. one of my teachers said that those who don't know history are bound to repeat it. Those who neglect to learn history are bound to neglect it. There were a couple of things that happened in the past that made the world to come together to say, you know what, we're no longer going to do things this way. We're going to change. We're going to change the way we do things. We're going to change the way we do things. And that gave rise to a lot of declarations, a lot of rules, a lot of common sense things that we need to do while conducting a research. So I'm going to follow this outline, the historical perspective, the considerations that were made, the outcomes, and then the conclusion. Above everything that you want to consider when you're doing a research, you want to do it for academic growth, you want to do it for ERAS or residency application fellowship, you want to do it for probably personal ambition, curiosity, different reasons why people do different things that they do in research. The bottom line is you want to do clinical research for the safety and well-being of people. Bottom line. If you miss that component, you've already derailed from day one in your ethical principles. So yes, I know we're in a hurry to submit November, September, June for fellowship, but if you miss that, safety and well-being of everything should be drilled on your research design, your thought process, your everything that you're doing in clinical research, how you pick your studies, when you pick your studies, what you want to publish, where you want to publish. The bottom line is safety of this trial. And I'll tell you how they came to this conclusion. Safety and well-being of clinical research subjects.
I don't know what
So, Dr. Eddie, can you hear me?
Yes.
So in the okay, so what you're really saying, if I will interrupt here, is that research is 20% about you who is doing the study and 90% about the participants that you're looking at.
Absolutely. The bottom line, there's this what they call good clinical practice. All of us physicians know the bottom line why I am a doctor. Yes, there's money in medical profession, there's fame, there's joy, but the bottom line is safety and well-being. And that drives us into every aspect of medical genre that you want to branch. You want to go into research, safety, well-being. If you want to go into establishing your primary care, well-being. If you want to go into academic medicine, well-being. If you want to go into primary care, well-being of patients. That's the bottom line that drives everything. And that also spills into the ethical nature of clinical research. If you want to publish a paper, yes, I want to publish a paper, but please keep this in mind. The reason why you are doing this venture is safety and well-being of patients, bottom line. And I'll give you a story. I'll give you a historical background. There were a couple of very tragic events that happened. Lots of them happened, thousands of them, hundreds of them, but there were key landmark events that happened in the past that made the world that governs clinical research to come together to say, hey, everybody take a chill. This is what we're going to do now. We're going to institute these laws, these regulations to govern us. You must have famously heard of these trials that are listed on the screen, the Tuskegee trial. Well, I have an accent, I say Tuskegee, but because I have a friend who usually called Tuskegee in school, but Tuskegee trial, the Jewish trial, the thalidomide tragedy, the Hiller cell trial, Homburg prison trial. I'll go into each and every one of them to view the story to see why you should engrave in your heart these ethical rules that I'm eventually going to explain. We must have seen these pictures all over the internet. Permission from the copyright to Google Pictures and Getty Images. Some of these trials were unethically done in the past. And as at the time they were doing it, the scientists, in quotes, argued that they were doing the right thing. I'll give you an example. The Nazi medical experiment during the World War II. The Nazi doctors did so many things that we all know that were inhuman. However, on the other side of the argument, they will argue that these things that we did helped to advance medicine. I'll give you a typical example on the other side of the argument. They were impregnating women, lots of women. They had a lot of women and they were impregnating them. And then at every week of their pregnancy, they would cut them open to actually see how the baby was positioned in the uterus. And they would draw it. Many of the images and the developmental milestones in utero of what we know now as medical doctors and how we function now part of them came out from those Nazi experiments that they did. They were cutting people's brain open to see how the brains of the schizophrenic looks like. Like, for example, in picture frame 2, they were actually cutting a live person's thoracic cavity open to see how is the heart actually beating. How does it beat? Boom, boom, boom. In their mind, they maintain they are advancing medicine, bringing out discoveries, writing a lot of theories, just like many of us are writing a lot of things now. We've had like 50 publications, 90 publications. But retrospectively, the world of human nature got to know that these things were really very unethical. The famous Tuskegee trial, for example, they needed to know how syphilis ran its course over 40 years. And they recruited these people. They didn't tell, as at then, there was treatment for syphilis, but they didn't tell them that there was treatment for syphilis. So because they needed to study these people for 40 years and they were following them, they had syphilis, they did not give them the treatment, and then they were following these people over the years. And they wrote about it because that's how we learned about tertiary stage of syphilis, primary stages of syphilis, and secondary syphilis and the rest. Good, it advanced medical knowledge, but the ethical nature that you subjected your fellow human being to such inhumanity is just unbelievable, just unimaginable. So respect for person, beneficence was all battered, those principles of ethics. Same thing in the Nazi experiment, same thing with the Wilbrook experiment. One very notable one was the HeLa cell line. The HeLa cell line, Henrietta Lacks had, I think, cervical cancer or one of the cancers in the reproductive tract. And then, cervical cancer. Dr. George harvested one of those cancers and then noticed that the cancer was multiplying. And that was that was an eureka moment for him. So he started using that single cell, and that triggered a whole lot of avalanche of I've forgotten the name, cell trials that we have now. That HeLa cell is still in circulation as we speak, that single cell that he harvested in 1951. But the thing is that they didn't tell this woman that they harvested that cell. They didn't tell this woman or her family that, oh, the cell had unique properties. And then they kept making money and selling the cells and then probably doing other things about the cells. In their thought process, perhaps, they thought that we are advancing medicine, but they did not take consent on this patient. Same thing with the thalidomide trial. The women were taking this thalidomide for, I think it was for contraception or for one reason. Can't remember specifically.
They were having nausea.
Yes, nausea and anorexia in pregnancy. Yeah. And then they were having birth defects in their children or the daughters of their children. And this trial went on for a long time. And the sponsor companies did not deem it fit to stop the trial at the time that the trial needed to stop. So a lot of ethical violations that happened between early 90s, late 18th centuries that I could go on and on and on and on and on and on and on. The Wilbrook hepatitis trial. So there were people then during the 50s, 40s, and when you have Down syndrome children or any neurodefective children, it's as good as you're giving up on the children. So they put these children a care home. And then the society concludes that those children are just, well, all gone. And then these scientists went there, they actually wanted, so they were looking for, thank you so much, Thalidomide. They were looking for how to study hepatitis and the cause of hepatitis, just like in the Tuskegee trial. And then they injected this, in quotes, abandoned children or abandoned people. They injected them with hepatitis, and then they followed them over a time. A lot of things that happened then. They didn't tell the parents, they didn't tell the kids, they didn't tell anybody. And they were just watching these children suffer hepatitis, and they were writing and writing and publishing and publishing and writing. Retrospectively, we knew that even if this person does not have capacity, there are proper ways to respect the person ethically. Even the person is in prison. I wanted to ask a question. If someone is in prison, do you need consent to do a research on that person? Absolutely yes. That you are in prison does not remove your human right. It just restricts your rights of movement. It does not restrict your right to life, your right to choice, your right to whatever. It just restricts a little bit of your movement and some other laws that govern the prison infractions. So these things that happened in the past triggered a lot of emotions subsequently. Then in 1960s or late 70s, scientists started coming together to review what has happened in the past. And we talked to ourselves that no, these are ethical abuses. Respect for person was abused, beneficence, justice. I could go on and on and on, giving examples of this abuses that have happened. And then they said, we're going to put a stop to it. And those chronology of history, I just mentioned those few, there were thousands, the Milgram study, going on, and the ones that happened in the 17th century when they were injecting people with all sorts of carbs, plagues, and the rest without even consenting. When the king was the emperor, decides what to happen to his subjects, and and so forth and so on. So they gave birth to this ethical codes that we're going to discuss moving forward, and how I will now bring it down to how it applies to me and you on an everyday level.
So going back a bit to the history, something that I see that is same from the times of Tuskegee and the times of Beretta and the times of the Nazi studies to our time today is that even though on some hand it may have been very obvious that they were being inhuman, looking at, for example, the Nazi study, but on the other hand, some of the other studies were trying to advance medicine like we are trying to do today. The goal is, how do I, improve cervical cancer outcome? How do I, and it's a very common occurrence with us as scientists. We're always thinking to advance medicine, but talks like this give us that reminder to take a second back to say, hey, I know I want to advance medicine, but how do I protect the subjects? How do I advance medicine for the subjects, who I'm looking to do it for, and how do I protect them while I'm going through it? It's pretty interesting because the thalidomide study, one of the things that helped was the FDA chair lady who was here in the US at the time, and she was one of the people that took a second to say, hold on, I know this is helpful for nausea and vomiting, but what are the safety profiles? How do we ensure that we're looking out to make sure that our people are not going to suffer adverse outcomes from it? And that's how they reduced the incidences here in the US. So just to buttress and stay with you on that point.
Right. And that gave birth to one of those ethical codes in research, the non-malfeasance, do no harm. So in as much as you want to advance science, whatever research that you're designing, be it case report, be it literature review, be it prospective, interventional, multi-center clinical trials, whatever it is, just be in your mind that do no harm supersedes your other intentions. If you're trying to write a case report, because some people are going to say, I'm trying to write a literature review. How does it matter? If you're writing a literature review that is going to cause bias on a particular ethnic group, for example, or going to cause bias on a particular vulnerable population, or LGBT, handicapped, or whatever it is, take a step back and ask yourself, am I going to do a harm to this vulnerable population? Am I going to do a harm to this setup? This my literature review writing on hysterectomy in or non-hysterectomy in LGBTQ. Am I going to cause them mental torture? Am I going to cause them mental harm? When you take a step back and say, is it ethically right? And we're going to touch on all those ethical principles of normal, patience, justice. We're going to discuss in a very simple manner. Dr. Doyin?
Yeah, so in addition to everything you've said, I mean, of course, we'll go into some details about all the specific cases. Like you have already said, it's important to not only be too ambitious about how we want to advance medicine and how we want to do good, and not counting the human cost that will come with it. I mean, if we cast our mind back to when they were doing all of those experiments on people, one thing that you can kind of deduce is that not all men were treated equal. Some were treated as if they were second class, prisoners of war, mentally, intellectual disability, race, and everything. But one of the things that the ethical part of, and one of the things, one of the important things is that these things were not necessarily illegal at those points, because that's why this is called ethical. So something may not be illegal, but it may be unethical. So, so that is why it is important to ensure that some of these things that we're doing, as much as we're trying to advance the practice of medicine and everything, the human cost has to be put into consideration, and people need to be treated as equal. And it's one of the things we're also talking about in research now, which is one of the new things that is coming up, is making sure that when you're doing research, there is inclusivity in research. For example, many of the research that have been done, like were specifically on a particular race, and then they are generalizing it. So all of those kind of things like that. I know Edward is going to talk about it subsequently in the talk. So yeah, that's.
Dr. Ed, do you mind throwing some light on? Thank you, Dr. Doyin, for that brilliant perspective. I love that idea that it may not be illegal, but it may be unethical.
Unethical.
Do you mind throwing some light on, while we're still on these histories that happened through these times, on direct and indirect consequences, direct consequences like we can see on some of the images on the patients themselves or the participants themselves who were fought through the process, but then indirect consequences on their family. For example, Henrietta Lacks, she had cervical cancer. She died, frankly, from not from anything about the study. Her cells were taken, but the impact for her family. Do you mind throwing some light on so that we are also thinking about that perspective as well as we're moving through?
Absolutely. The impact of unethical approaches, or unethical character, or unethical moves, or unethical behavior of a scientist not only affects just the study, but has both an immediate, short-term, long-term, local, and global consequences. I'll give you an example. There were some studies that were illegally done in Africa, testing some of these medications. Some were done in Cameroon, some were done in Liberia, lots of them were done in Congo Republic. And then these studies were actually recent studies, not even 1960 studies, 1990, early 2000 studies. So they inflicted, I'll give a typical example. There was a polio trial that was illegally done somewhere in North Africa, and then they inflicted polio And not only that, the damage was on the immediate family and the society. The rates or the incidence or the prevalence of polio in that particular society is way over 90%. That means 9 out of every 10 children had polio. That's an immediate consequence of an ethical behavior from a foreign partner who perhaps wanted to do a trial on a population that he felt was vulnerable and could not speak up. And then eventually, that population currently is now being plagued, years past, that population currently is now being plagued by economic downturn. Because if you have a population where you have 9 people paralyzed from polio out of 10, you should imagine how their productivity level, economic-wise, is going to be. And that has spiraled into so many other things. Okay, this particular community cannot support itself. The neighboring community bears the drugs because the rate, we all know that wherever there's poverty, the rate of diseases, the rate of crime, the rate of just name it, all the negative indicators, health indicators, all begin to jump up. And then that eventually affected the communities around and keeping those communities and countries around still down in poverty. So that will show you the effect of one single man's act spiraling from just one person to, a more economic or global issue. Currently, there's a debate on whether the US is going to sponsor those countries that are affected with finances. Now, if they dole out, let's say $50 billion, for example, to compensate or to sponsor or to give aid to those countries, eventually they are losing $50 billion from their economy, an economy that's going to get $50 billion that would have been able to build roads in Washington, D.C., or roads in Great Britain, or roads in Great China. These developed countries are now doling it out in order to support or mentally support this. So you see how wealth is scaling around, and eventually the act of one man from wherever Kafanchan or whatever the science is like, eventually spills to everybody. So there are so many remarkable examples that can go on and on and on, but we just want to keep the conversation.
Yeah, I can also add that I think there was a time in Kano that they did this ethylene glycol thing on kids, and it resulted in renal failure in those kids, and it's one of the reasons why, like in the northern Nigeria, anything that has to do with medicine, vaccination, sometimes they kick against it. Exactly. So it's one of the consequences of unethical practices of scientists when they are so ambitious and neglect the human cost that comes with some of those experiments.
In fact, currently, because I'm very, I've been exposed in a lot of cancer research and cancer research coordination. We are very careful on, or we not careful, we find it difficult to penetrate a particular race because of respect for that race. I don't want to mention their name, but we find it difficult to convince them to come into clinical trial because of the fear that they have that the government wants to manipulate this specific race. So this woman is on stage 4 metastasis, and there's this promising clinical trial that's going to help to shrink this tumor. And we're trying to let her know that this is a clinical trial, but it may help your tumor. We have seen it help other people's tumor. We're not guaranteeing, but it may help a tumor. And the woman will tell you no. And if you probe further to find out why don't you want to you don't have another option, why don't you want to get into this research? They will tell you that they've used my people in the past. I don't want them to use me again. And then that increases disease burden in that particular community group. And if it increases disease burden in that particular community group, health utilization goes up, cost of healthcare goes up, insurance in that particular race and that particular region, the cost of insurance will jump up. There was a calculation I was looking at, and the burden of, there was a research and calculation that we're doing on the burden of diseases and how it affects cost of healthcare in a particular region. We found out that a particular race that had higher disease burden and also poorer socioeconomic status had higher costs per head for insurance. A typical example, the calculation was looking at about 300% rise on insurance costs on that particular social social factor, social race factor. So these are consequences of things that were done in the 60s, still having effect, even as generations age and generations come to pass. It's a whole cascade of unfortunate events that we hope that we'll continue talking about it, like in these forums like this, will bring awareness to researchers, young researchers, to pay attention to detail, ethical considerations, paramount before you do anything you want to do in research.
Okay, so I also believe that there are guidelines that have been set. So I think we can go to that. I think all of this WHO, all of those ones. I think is that our next one?
Yes, that's our next slide. Absolutely. Okay. So what happened, as the years unfolded, humans came together to say, we need to refine the way we do things in research. And that has kept on evolving and changing and changing. One of the first things that came up was in 1947, the Nuremberg Code. People came together and said, no, what happened in World War II, it's unethical, even though that they claim to advance science, but it's clearly unethical. So they lay down clear principles before you do any research on human subject. I'll later eventually define what human subject means. You need to take consent. You need to ask the person, do you want to participate in this research? These are the advantages, these are the disadvantages, full disclosure, consent, and I'll talk about consenting process. It's not about me, the scientist, it's about him. If he doesn't want to do it, don't do it. Declaration of Helsinki came after in 1964, where other ethical principles were added to the Nuremberg Code. That's the beneficence aspect of it. That this patient, this subject, there must be something for him to benefit. The merits must outweigh the demerits before you engage in this research. And then the Vermont conference I think Vermont is in the US, came and they started maximizing the ethical codes that Nuremberg Code, the Declaration of Helsinki, that they made. They started adding beneficence, justice, fairness. Like Dr. Doyin said, justice is don't exclude a particular set of people, vulnerable or not vulnerable in your research, complete inclusivity, for example, is a typical example of justice, and their justice covers so many other things. Is it right? Is it worth doing? And then in 1991, what currently governs us in clinical research is a common rule. There are a lot of CFRs. There's something called CFR, code CFR 46, CFR 45, CFR 43, that eventually the FDA, not just the FDA, the United States government put together to say, we know that there's consent, there's beneficence, there's justice, but we need a set of people to sit down together to ensure that the subject is protected. And those set of people are going to be called a review board. And then whatever institution they belong to, we call them institutional review board. So it was in 1991 that they set up the institutional review board that governs what you and I do. A lot of people argue that I'm not in an institution yet, especially for applicants or independent researchers, but there are other institutions, other review boards that govern them, like the central review board that should govern whatever you do in clinical research. And then other things started adding up as the years begin to unfold. The ethics, the principles of good clinical practice. There are about 10 principles of good clinical practice. I don't want to go over them, but every physician knows what good clinical practice is. If it is not going to benefit your patient, don't do it. Don't do it. If the demerits outweigh the merits, don't do it. It's not about you, it's about the patient. If this thing is going to benefit the patient and the patient says, I don't want to do it, it's the patient's right. There's nothing you're going to do about it. He doesn't want to go do the CT scan. He doesn't want to go do the CT scan. That's it. And you work with another plan that, many of us are physicians. I will let Dr. Toby and Dr. Doyin weigh in on this good clinical practice, because a lot of things in good clinical practice, they are ethical, soft-spoken, not written most of the time. They are 10 written words, but hundreds of them are not written. Respect your patient. Like, for example, patient's privacy should be respected. In as much as I love my patient, I shouldn't come home and start discussing it with my wife. In as much as I love my wife, respect your patient. There's nobody governing me in my room to look at what I'm discussing with my wife, but ethically, I should be guided that I should not discuss this patient that I saw today with cervical cancer with my wife, because my wife is not part of the care for that particular patient. And then, other adverse event reporting system, the FDA is very strong on that. Whatever clinical trial you're doing on any patient, you must report the adverse event, even if it is not related to that patient. If a patient is enrolled in the trial and then the patient is walking somewhere to go and buy maybe bread or biscuits, and the patient has an accident or falls or just stumps his leg on a stone and has a bruise. As long as that patient is enrolled in a clinical trial, that patient fall or bruise or whatever, hit his head on a rock, should be reported. It is now left for the PI to determine if this adverse event is related to the trial or is not related to the trial. So FDA is very big on reporting adverse events. It's something I want to throw out there. If you're involved in a clinical trial or you are trying to do a clinical trial on a set of people, alcohol anonymous, and you're doing something on them, and then someday some of them has a domestic fight with his wife and then break his head, that break head is reportable as an adverse event. It is not left for you, the PI, to determine if it is related to my clinical trial, to the trial that I'm trying to study alcohol anonymous or not, is not related. And then strengthening transparency in research, that has become a very big topic these days. A lot of things that people do, they just sit in their room and they cook up figures. And then those research are not visible. And then you wonder, how did they generate P value equal to 0.12? And that's why most of our researchers go through peer review, and the peers asking, how did you come to this conclusion? Transparency, how did you gather your data? What was the methodology? What was the process? And you find out many of the researchers that are rejected, they fell short of this transparency. If you look at 90% of articles that were rejected from peers or from publishers, they did not tell us what was their limitation, how did you get your data, what were the steps that you took to get your data, how did you analyze your data, what software did you use, because they need absolute transparency. And they don't want to see a paper that me and you just sit down today and then we'll cook up one figure and say 8 is CD4 count is no longer relevant. Because people can do it. After a while, people get so much intoxicated with the level of knowledge that they have, usually when they get to a certain authority, that they could come out and say, Professor John says the telomerase is XYZ, and then everybody believes him. But if you look at the paper, there was no transparency on how he got to the conclusion that telomerase is XYZ. So the talk these days is shifting on complete transparency. And there are so many other ethical codes that we're going to talk about. Because of time, I'm going to skip to some of them. I want to say some things on AI and ethical AI research, which has also become the front burners. Many research regulators, Office of the Federal OHR office, CFR offices, the FDAs, the journals, the editors, board of publishers, they're now becoming big on if you're using an AI to do research, because AIs are codified elements. They are prone to mistakes. You have to be held accountable to whatever that AI generated. So if I generate a reference with using an AI and that reference doesn't exist, if that reference causes problem in the future, or if that research causes any stump in the future, I am responsible, completely responsible for it. I'm not going to blame it on an AI that was designed by Microsoft or an AI that was designed by Grammarly or whatever. All right, many of us use AIs and trying to do things. We use Grammarly to reformat our statements or whatever software that we use to make our statement look clean and sharp. But whatever error that AI does, we are responsible. So these are the various evolutions of this ethical trend from the time of where we had these serious malfunctions to where we are now, the Nuremberg Code, Declaration of Helsinki. They are historical, but they help to build the next step of the conversation that I want to say. So having this in mind, that there are codes that guide us, the codes of beneficence, the code of justice, the code of just normal efficiency. It is important that whenever you want to commence a study, you have to ask yourself, what is the ethical guideline on this study? First, is it a primary study or secondary study? What are the ethical bodies that govern me? It's something that you have to ask yourself. Nobody's going to tell you. Are there institutional boards that are going to give me approval? And here we talk about institutional approval. If I want to do a research, I'm a resident, a fellow, a professor, a PhD candidate, I have to ask myself, in any institution that I am, I'm interested in research, first thing you ask yourself is, what in this my hospital, who sets the law? Is it my departmental chair? Is it my program director? Do we have an ethics committee? And many hospitals, all hospitals, for example, have ethics committee, institutional review board, or they have an affiliate ethics committee or institutional review board, or they have a guideline that governs how you go about clinical research. When I tell people, I know there's crunch to publish case reports, this and that, please take your time and get approval from your head of department or institutional head or whoever is in charge. Or you may have what they call a blanket approval, like some of us, when we started residency, they gave us a lecture and said, all case reports don't need to go through the IRB. So they've given us a blanket report. The next thing I did was I sent an email and said, please, I need this, what you just said, I need it in an email so that it will act as a backup. So that tomorrow, if I publish a case report, the patient is not going to come and say, when probably then I become a billionaire because I want to be a billionaire someday. And the patient is going to say, hold a minute. That was me that Dr. Edward wrote about when he was a resident. And then they would sue me to court. I'll have evidence that my hospital told me that case reports don't need to go through ethical approval. But if your hospital doesn't tell you otherwise, find out how it is, how they go about getting their approvals. And these things are templated, simple form, click, 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 click. Many of these ethical approval forms just need you to click, give some explanation, and submit. Don't be in a hurry to get out research without getting to know the process, especially if you are in an institution. If you're not in an institution, there are community ethical review boards that govern whatever community that you're trying to carry out your research. Find out what is the process and then go through them. For example, I might not be a resident and I'm just trying to get into residency, but I want to do a research in my community to find out the incidence of tuberculosis in South Florida, right? So I design my study. I want to share a questionnaire, send it through posts. I go to post office, I buy what they call it, mass mail stamps. So I send it to everybody to fill out the questionnaire. How long have you been coughing? Have you been diagnosed with tuberculosis? Blah, blah, blah. And I expect them to send it back to me. I put a return ticket, the return envelope. Before I do that, I have to look at South Florida, my region, and find out what institutional review board governs this activity. Get an approval from them, and then proceed with your study. If you cannot find, I give an example, Citizens IRB, Open Science Framework. Some of them are paid, some of them are not paid. There's also one World Institutional Review Board. That is, I think they've changed their name now. You can go online, register with them, send them an email. They are human beings like you and I, and they're very ready to respond. This is their job, to protect the subjects from unethical activities from researchers like us. And once you're done with getting your ethical approval, the next step is, if you are doing a human study, the consenting process. Like I said initially.
Before we go a bit into the consent, and I just wanted to draw home this idea of being the advocate for the patient. Just listening to you talk about going from all of the declarations, Nuremberg, Helsinki, and coming down to where we're at now, having this organized institutional review boards that we have to go through. But something I'm hearing from what you're saying is that institution starts from you. You know, the institution to protect the patient starts from you thinking about it. Something that happened, you know, recently in my hospital was there was this research that they did, and you know, they didn't go through the IRB, and somehow, you know, it got to the hearing of the authorities that they didn't go through the IRB. Now, you know, being here listening to this talk just empowers me with that knowledge to know to take that second to say, you know, if I'm on that project, I should be that advocate to say, hey, you know, I think there's something we're missing. You know, once you have the research idea, once you're looking to do, you know, thinking to say, hey, I think we're missing this process. I think we should get this ethical approval. I think so. Being that advocate for your patients, for the study that you're looking to do, is a good way to go. That's kind of what the sense I'm getting from, you know, everything that you're saying.
Absolutely. You know, I usually say from my little experience, treat every patient like yourself. That's my personal slang. I wouldn't want to see, you know, why I said is that there's this argument that in case report you don't get consent and you get consent and whatnot. I wouldn't want to see the narrative of my, for example, in quotes, my brain disease on a journal from a doctor who managed me without my consent. Personally, I'll feel violated. So if you know that this is actually not right when they do it to you, don't do it to your patient. Don't just go and publish your patient's case without getting proper consent. And these processes of consent or approvals are very straightforward. Walk into the patient's room. Hello, Mr. John. Your case is so interesting. I think it's worth letting the medical community and the world know about it. And we're going to anonymize all your identity, none of your identity, and there are 13 or 14 identities that you can anonymize. We're going to go through it, but we'll get there. We're going to anonymize it. The purpose of this thing is to help the younger generation, future generations, and people that are also facing this particular challenge or this particular case in the future, other doctors in rural area or in urban areas that will benefit from the knowledge on how we manage you to, you know, revive you from renal failure now to a chronic renal failure or your whatever stage of heart disease to where we are now. I think it's going to be an interesting thing. Many patients want to say, yes, go ahead and publish it. And then at the end of the publication, you also you will be transparent enough to say, Mr. John, we publish your work. This is it. You can read about it confidently because you know that you've protected the patient all through from the time you got the approval to the time you published it. And Mr. John will be so happy, probably have a copy of the journal and keep it in his house and say, thank you, doctor. But if you go ahead and join the argument that says, oh, no, I'm not going to get the consent, and then because nobody's going to hold you responsible, remember that the word karma or the future or the nature has a way of coming back to you either now or in the future. Absolutely very, very important to get these approvals. In this academy, we try to let people know that these things are easy to do. If you set out your heart to do them, don't be in a hurry. Don't let your urge to get this research done outweigh the urge to protect the patient's right to the, you know, ethical considerations in research. So there's also some other things that also govern us in, must the consent be written or verbal? Yes, the consent must be written. Okay, let me answer it. A consent can be verbal or written. However, because you are going to be a world star, you need documented evidence to protect you in the future. You know, one of the things that we practice in medicine is very unfortunate. Is what they call defensive medicine. You know, they call it cover your ass, in quotes. You might get a verbal consent from the next of kin or from the patient or from whoever has, you know, has been assigned to give the consent verbally or on the phone, verbally. You make a documentation. But one of the principles of informed consent is to document. You have to document, documentation of consent. Even if you got it verbally, in the patient's EMR, you have to state it somewhere. Patient gave us consent by this so time, so weakness. If your hospital doesn't, let's say you're operating in 12 countries where they don't have a consent form or consenting process, please document. Because someday, if you don't document, you may get away with 100 of them. One of them is going to come back to haunt you. And then you would have grown so much in your career and probably giving presentations in world stages. And then someday something so trivial will come back to haunt you. So my advice sitting from here, I'm not an expert. My presentation has limitations. Is please document. If you have a template for, use a template. Now, the next question is, what if I want to do case series of maybe 100 people? How do I get consent from all of them? And they've already been discharged and probably lost to follow-up, and we don't even know where they are. Those cases have exemptions. So I'll talk about exemptions in clinical research, in consent form. So you write to the IRB that the reason why you are seeking for exemption is because I can no longer trace this patient, but this particular case will benefit the medical community or whatever community that all the time you're objecting. And then they're going to give you an exempt because you can no longer find these patients in the population, or you can no longer find it that they've been lost to follow-up. So those are one of the situations where you can get an exempt. There are other, thank you, Dr. Cece, who took your time to join us. Thank you so much. Other considerations, the HIPAA Health Information, I usually mess this thing up here. Health Information Portability and Accountability Act that protects our patients. You also have to follow the guidelines and codes of HIPAA and how it functions. This is big for us as physicians, because if you mess up with your HIPAA processes and protecting HIPAA and its codes, you're going to lose your job. Straightforward. I have a friend that got into residency, second year, and a patient, and he checked his EMR. Third year, when he got into it took them like 6 months for some reason to just blow the whistle that this particular patient went to his EMR, his own personal EMR, and checked his record. And in the third year of internal medicine, he lost his residency. So bitter. And he called me, can you imagine it happened like 8 months ago? I'm like, yes, because HIPAA doesn't allow you to check your EMR as a physician. Even though you're working in that hospital, you don't have the right to check your EMR. And it's clearly written in there. But hey, these things are very difficult to argue. You have a patient who you see him in the ER, he's having some problems with his sexual life or whatever. And then, oh wow, Dr. John, that syphilis is still there. And then he's not your direct patient, and then you're violating HIPAA law. Many of us know that I don't want to go into HIPAA. I don't want to overburden HIPAA. But summarily, if your research borders on human subject and the common law describes what human subject means, now I'll read it. It refers to individuals who is directly involved in a research study. Like if that individual is providing data, or you're having an intervention in that individual, or an interaction with that individual, even if it's an observational form of interaction, you're not even saying anything, you're observing this Alcohol Anonymous group, how many times they go and how they come back and how many times they relapse. You're not talking to anybody, for example. That is a research. Or you're observing a focus group, you're observing children in classroom, autistic children, how they behave. That is human study, even though you're not having an intervention on them. So human study has been clearly defined, involvement directly or indirectly of living humans. You have to obtain a consent, you have to get an approval through the ethical boards or whatever ethical regulation that governs that institution that you have. So human subject, type of human subject studies, I've mentioned a few of them. Prospective interventional studies, we all know that is very clear. Survey questions, we need someone to give you a survey, whether public survey or private survey, you need consent and you need an approval from an IRB to do that. And part of the ways that you send consent is to send it through an email. You can do an email blast to all the doctors in this group, for example, saying, hey, I'll be doing a research on people that know how to conduct clinical research. Do you consent to the study? This is an advantage, this is a disadvantage, and the consent form has a template. And these templates are readily available, downloadable even on the internet. And we have templates of them. I'll share many of these templates at the end of the meeting, so you can have as many of them. You are interviewing a focus group, you're having an observational study, I talked about that, interventional case report and case series, we talked about the pros and cons of getting consent form from them and the barriers and the various debates that align. So this is a typical flow of when you conceptualize a study. Once you conceptualize a study, the next thing is to think, does this study need ethical approval? Yes or no? If the study needs an ethical approval, get an ethical approval. If the study doesn't need an ethical approval, then you proceed. If the study needs an ethical approval and it involves human study, it's a human study from our definition of human study, please get a consent from patients that you're going to study or from the subjects that you're going to study. Then go do your study. In your study, there are also other ethical considerations that we're going to talk about in your study. And then at the end of the study, by the time you do your publications, you have to do your disclosure. Disclosures include no conflict of interest, for example. If I'm doing a study for Pfizer and Pfizer is paying me as a manager, you know that definitely there's going to be conflict of interest because I'm not going to publish a study, perhaps, that goes against my paymaster. So I have to do ethical declaration that I work with Pfizer. So that will determine how you perceive the research that I do on that particular topic, and so many others. I'm going to go into some specific ones later on. However, there are some studies that don't require ethical approval. One of them is secondary researches. Secondary researches mean data that is available publicly, de-identified. It's already available. It's already been approved. For example, many of the studies that we've been publishing lately have been NIS or NEEDS or HANES study or CDC Wonder. CDC has already gotten the ethical approval to publish those data. Now we have those data, trends of obesity in the US or number of obesity. What we now do is we collect the total number of obesity in 2012, 2013, 2014, up to 2015, and we analyze the trend, and then we try to draw associations. Is it because people are smoking more, that's why we're having more obesity, or people are quitting smoking, that's why we're having obesity? So we try to get two variables and we analyze them. Those kind of studies that have publicly available data, they don't need ethical approval. Some of them, not all of them. So I'm giving some example. Quality improvement. It's a thin line between what is a research and what is a quality improvement. For example, if I'm looking at hand washing in my hospital to see how I can improve, I'm looking at the characteristics or the way hand washing is done in my hospital to see if I could improve, if I could reduce the burden of hospital-acquired infection. Because I'm doing this research with an aim to improve something, that becomes a quality improvement project. Those quality improvement projects many of them don't need ethical approval to do. However, because there's a thin line between determining what is a quality improvement and what is a research. Am I doing this fact-checking activity to improve quality, or am I doing it to study and understand something and then review something? There are two different ways. So what I advise people from my point of view is, if it is confusing, if it is gray, just go to your institution and say, hey, I want to do this, I want to improve hand care, or I want to improve the time of patient wait in the ER, or I want to improve the time of transfer from the ER to the wards. That's what I want to do. It's a quality improvement project from my point of view. What do you think? Do you think it's a research? Do I need an approval? And then they go ahead and they give you an approval, and then you design your concept. The average wait time to transfer from ER to the ward is like maybe 12 hours or 6 hours. I want to reduce it. Or the number of nosocomial infections in the hospital last year was probably 300. I want to reduce it by 5. And this is what I want to institute. I want to see how hand washing, locating hand washing closer to entry points rather than closer to the patient, which is going to improve or reduce nosocomial transmissions of infection. And then you do your project, your project methodology, your design, and then you carry out, and then you publish it. That's a quality improvement with it. For you to determine if it requires an ethical approval or non-ethical approval, you need to, in gray areas, go through your department, go through your institution, and then talk about case report. I don't know that Florian talked about it before. Other ethical approvals, we talked about consent, we talked about confidentiality and anonymity. Data protection is big, 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 key. There's a lot of data leakages and data manipulations. People can get this data, and then I say the world that we live in is governed by the rich and then some, in quote, mafias. I remember something that happened somewhere I worked. There was a community that was plagued by sugarcane, and then the rate at which they burn sugarcane farms, and it increases the COPD in that community. That was years back. And we wanted to do a research to see if there was, because there was a time in the year, there's a season that they burn the sugarcane farms. And then that season also tallies with the time that we have exacerbation of COPD. So we wanted to do a community study to see, does this affect COPD? Now, that particular study will, if we had completed it, it may indict that company that has those farms, right? And that company is so rich, they were even sponsoring the institutions. They had free war, they were giving free, healthcare and various things. The minute they learned that we wanted to do we wanted to do a research to see an association between COPD and sugarcane burning, we already were on the stage of analyzing, because what we had was an anecdotal concern or anecdotal suspicion. But we wanted to put it in fact that, okay, between August and where this sugarcane farm burning, there's an increase or there's a peak in COPD. The minute they discovered where our trend of thought was going, the chief of the hospital called us and said, this study, stop it. And then we terminated that study. So data protection is key, because so many things can go wrong at every stage of your data. Even your fellow researcher could steal your data and then go to publish it. And then when you publish it, becomes plagiarized. That has happened to so many of us in this research. We're working in groups, somebody published, and then eventually we sent it to the journal, and then the journal told us that, hey, someone else has published what you already published. We're like, wow, how did it happen? And then we returned back to our group and found out that there were leakages here and there. So protect your data, avoid harm to your patients, avoid harm to your subject. We've said that in beneficence and non-efficient. Conflict of interest, we talked about it. If you're involved in a study and then, for example, if I'm an LGBTQ community person and then I'm writing on LGBTQ, I should be able to disclose that I'm LGBTQ, writing on an LGBT community, because that will influence my perspective on what I write. If I'm a Black writing on Blacks, I should disclose that I'm a Black person, because that would influence my perspective on racial discriminations or health inequalities. A lot of biases, unspoken biases that we notice or that we see. Ethically, disclosures are so important. Research designs and method, we've talked about that. Design should be targeted on the patient's well-being rather than on your advancement of medical knowledge. Transparency and reproducibility are also ethical concerns that you have to think about. We've also talked about transparency and reproducibility. Whatever you do must be reproduced, should be reproducible. It's not voodoo. So science is not voodoo. And how did you come to the conclusion? How did you conclude that hypertension is higher in males or higher in Blacks than in whites? How do you conclude that? How did you come to that conclusion? Because whatever statement that we're putting out there, that we're publishing out there, is affecting or is going to affect one person directly or indirectly. Someone someday is going to read your research and say, hey, Edwards, you said that in rural America, obesity is worse in Blacks than in white. But that's not true, or that's true, or something. How did you get to that thing? You should be able to be plain and transparent in the researches that you do. Respect for diversity has been overflowed in this conversation. Inclusivity, respect for diversity. Last 2 or 3 ethical considerations. Plagiarism and citation is big. People can lose their jobs. People can lose their, not just about losing their job. It is not ethically right to write what someone wrote down. It's not ethically right to reproduce what someone wrote down and claim that you had the original idea. I tell people it's very straightforward and easy. Cite the person. Just cite the person. Just in brackets, square root bracket or hypertext 1, John et al. It's that simple. There's nothing new under the sun. Even Isaac Newton is not new. When he was doing his studies, he was also citing other people. Very few studies are noble. Very few studies. And most results or studies that are noble actually came accidentally. Probably when they were doing something along one line and then they had a Eureka moment. So don't be afraid or shy or unethically non-correct or ethically incorrect to cite someone. A friend of mine who we write together, I usually ask me, Edward, should I put citation here? Oh, these citations are getting so much. I'm getting like 80 citations. I'm like, hey, you rather cite 80 citations than you claim that you own the job, and then you rather oversight than you undercite. And these days, the advances in technology has improved the way you do these citations. Simple, use citation generators, and you generate citations, and you see people that talked about that, and then you add them, and you give them credit for their work. It's as straightforward as that. Animal research has also been, many of us are not into that, but I've done a little bit of that as a clinical research. There's a big talk on animal research and a big debate. I don't want to bother us with that, but there are things that you do to protect the rights of those animals to ensure that what you're doing is ethically right to that animal, not just getting a white rat and smacking his head and trying to figure out how the white rat responds to trauma. There should be a design approved by an animal ethical right for your study. But I know that many of us here are not into preclinical or bench studies. Same thing with repositories. For example, pathological specimens, human specimens that you want to collect from a pathological lab. There are ways to go about collecting morbid specimens, even though the people have died of COVID. There's a particular study that's ongoing now where we're looking at long changes in COVID-19. We're looking at the pathological patterns of different people that died in COVID. We have to go a long way to get our approval, even though these people are already dead, but these are still human tissues that we're going to deal with. There's an argument, should I get approval for morbid researches, or should I not get approval? I rather toe the line of getting an approval than eventually it comes back to haunt me, like the Tuskegee trial or the Nazi trials later in the future. In summary, where's my summary? In summary, this presentation has carried us through history, what are ethical considerations, how did we get to where we are in terms of what are the historical landmark things that happened that's made these ethical codes to be written, what these ethical codes are, and then how you apply them to your everyday research activity. And lastly, provided clinical tips for researchers. I provided a lot of clinical tips, and I'm going to share some materials that we have, consent forms, templates for consent forms, template for IRB requests, sites where you can get IRB approval. So I'm going to share it in the forum or to anyone that's involved. I'm also going to share this on YouTube. This discussion is it's not all encompassing because there's a lot to talk about ethics. Well, we just took a snippet of it, and I hope we've been able to convince you that ethical considerations are paramount in clinical research. Before I go, these are the references that I use for this work. I could share them with you so you could read more about them. Very, very interesting write-ups from different people. And I also want to appreciate my team, Dr. Endurance, Dr. Henry, Dr. Bimbola, Dr. Tobe, Dr. Doyin, and so many other people that have joined us over the years, trying to strengthen us. Dr. Zoe, who's always, partnering with all, Dr. OJ, Dr. Cece. I could go on and on and on.
Edward, wait. Why did you put me with all these ugly people?
And So, lots of people that have, been with us over the years, Dr. Tom, I could go on, and all the doctors that have joined us in this forum are from Canada, from UK, from Nigeria, people that have not mentioned their name in the CAMS struggle, on the US MLE struggle, on the UK pathway struggle. Let's engrave in us these principles and more that I've, expanded today. Lastly, my kitchen cabinet, my inner carcass, my amazing, beautiful wife, and my kids who I locked away so that I could give this presentation. And once I'm done with this presentation, yeah, just outside the door, screaming and hitting on the decks. Thank you, everyone, for this time. Thank you so much. Question and answer briefly, and then we could end for the day.
I think this was an amazing talk. Just driving home the point about ethics and research. How do you consent patients who are intubated, patients who are not able to communicate in the hospital, and you need to get consents for your research work? Just like a line on that.
Thank you. Before I answer that, thank you, Dr. Zoe. Hospitals don't want you to do quality improvements that will make the hospital look bad. I asked about one and they discouraged me because if the statistics come out, yes, hospitals don't want you to. Generally, people don't want to do things that make them look bad, but hey, they say choose your battles carefully. If you know that whatever you're going to do is going to make you pitch tents with people that have your paycheck for the now. I'm not Martin Luther King, but people have different opinions. Just choose your battles carefully. Don't go, not just like what happened to us when we're trying to do that COPD versus farm burning thing. So just take note of that. Dr. Tobe, to jump into what you said, how do you get consent when someone does not have the capacity to give consent? I think that's how I'll summarize it. There are laid down principles on who's the next of kin, who has a power of attorney, or who's the next of kin, and we know these next of principles. Usually the wife is the next of kin, or if the court has stated that another person is a wife is next of kin, and if the wife is not available, the first, I think, is the son. That's the way it goes. It becomes the next of kin, and the next of son is not available, the daughter, and then it trickles down like that. There's a chain for next of kin. I don't have it completely well understood in my head, but there's a chain for next of kin that you can use to get consent. But on a side note, I usually say, do not, it's an adventurous venture to go to do a research on someone who is intubated. But I usually say, if it's not going to benefit the patient, remember, don't do it. You rather wait for the patient to get well so you can have the complete picture, so you can have a total picture, a follow-up phase of the patient. So you can now say, oh, this patient passed away because of ABC, or this patient got, but this was what happened, and we scheduled the patient for 5 years or 10 years, for follow-up, and blah, blah, blah. These are the post-follow-up findings, the X-ray or CT scan or spirometer findings, up and down. So yeah. You're on mute today.
Okay, thank you so much. I think we have two hands raised. Dr. Gabriel and Dr. Zoe. I think Dr. Gabriel raised first. So we're happy to hear your contribution as well.
First of all, let me. It's okay. It's okay. It's okay. I'll see you later. Sorry, guys.
It's okay. We got it.
Yeah. Yeah, Edward, I know you've joined the team. These are some of the things we see here. Okay. So first of all, I want to thank you all, your team. You guys are wonderful indeed. When I see our Nigerians doing very well, I'm very, very proud, and I like to associate with them. Having lived in UK for some time before I migrated to Canada, I like the Nigerian society so much. So my question goes this way: do we have a particular publication, as in, what do you call it? I'm trying to say, do you have a particular site for the publications? Like, we have different kinds of publication. You understand? Do you have a particular one you guys are using?
we don't endorse any particular publisher openly because of a lot of ethical reasons. There are some that we favor that are fast, easy to publish, but those ones, those discussions, we have them in a non-recorded setting at the ordinary session after the meeting. But publicly, we don't endorse any publisher. They're all equally good, or they have their different strengths and their weaknesses. And we advise you to go through the routine, looking for one that favors your article, and then you submit it to them.
Okay, thank you very much. The other questions I wanted to ask you, I think you were able to interact with me. I'm Dr. Gabriel, the one we chatted yesterday. You were able to.
Yeah, welcome, Dr. Gabriel.
It was very nice. Thank you very much, guys.
And I hope we see you again. So we have these talks every 2 weeks, just to stay on our interest in research is the aim of this conversation. At the end of 1 year, you should be confident in your research progress because we discuss so many topics every 2 weeks. Sunday night, 7 p.m. Dr. Zoe.
Thank you very much. I promise to be available all the time. Thank you.
Hi, Dr. Edward.
Hey, Dr. Zoe.
So, I think what I wanted to say is, I think when somebody doesn't have the capacity to consent, there are ways. Like, I work in the military as well. That's part of the hospital I'm assigned to. And sometimes a lot of them are either homeless, because a lot of them have PTSD they're on the street, but they frequent the VA. So I think I had an encounter where I wanted to kind of have consent for a report. I think it was a patient that had unusual case of it was restless leg syndrome, and it was also akathisia. It turns out that he has a previous history of restless leg. Turns out the akathisia was due to some of the drug he was doing. It was an unusual case, but the person was homeless and could not really consent in the beginning. So the way they have it there, it's set up is the person cannot consent. You should have to go through the hospital's governing body to obtain some kind of consent. And two, before you start, there's a paper you have to fill out that says, is this research geared towards assisting the patient or towards educating others? So you have to click one of those. So there are ways, even if the person does not have next of skin, like I said, in the military, there's a bunch of them that you really don't have next of kin. So so again, I guess the military is sort of different because you always see a lot of cases like Agent Orange. There's plenty of cases there that are quite unique. And those Agent Orange comes with a lot of multiple complications that are, itself there. Besides Agent Orange, there are other new, so for the military, that's the way we go about it. For our hospital, the main hospital itself, again, I keep in mind, I go to 3 or 4 different hospitals here in Vegas. So, so for us, sometimes we have a research buddy itself. So like whatever research you conduct during the residency itself is really not yours. Like if I do decide to come in and partner with you, I still have to obtain permission from the hospital. So every hospital is different. Every program is different when it comes to how they want you to do research. So for somebody like that, again, Vegas is also a place where people get lost. They come and they come in and gamble. They have absolutely no relatives. I come across plenty of people like that, where essentially they have 0 relatives, whether kids, sisters, brothers, they don't absolutely have no contact. So we generally have to go through the hospital body and sign some documents. So there are ways, especially if you're in residency, but on your own, if you're not in residency, I'm not sure how that goes.
Right. I think what Dr. Zoe said, just to add some voice to what she's saying, every regional location has ethical bodies that protect vulnerable communities or vulnerable population. Vulnerable populations, like we all know the definitions, is a typical example, people that are homeless, people in prison, people that don't have capacity, either mental capacity and physical capacity, or the capacity in terms of what the court defines as capacity to give consent, and there are processes to go about it. If you just ask around the institution, around where you live, you're going to see those protecting bodies that you're going to get approvals from to do that, especially if what you're doing is going to advance their welfare. But if what you want to do is not going to advance the welfare, it's going to be hard to get an approval, because one of the principles of good clinical practice is to advance the welfare of your clinical research subjects. Thank you so much.
Well, the other thing is when you obtain consent, and it's something also you have to explicitly mention somewhere in that consent that the patient has the right to refuse or to back out at any point. It must be stated there. If it's not stated there and they come after you, you're liable for it, whether you like it. Because it can imply the patient was coerced into that research.
Absolutely. It reminds me of what happened, some certain time we're trying to do a research on someone that had a foreign body somewhere that was very funny. And then the person it was a habitual thing. And then the person gave us a consent to proceed, and mid-study, the person said, I don't want my name to be on that paper. So the patient can have a right to withdraw consent even after you have published the paper, even after you have published it. You withdraw consent, you write to the editors and say, hey, patient withdrew consent, pull down every trace of my article, and then keep a copy of your email, your communication with the publishers, and then let the patient know that I withdrew this study, I withdrew everything, even years after you published the article. If the patient withdraws consent, please, please, and please withdraw your article and let everything just go. It's not about you, it's about the patient, summary. Thank you, Dr. Zoe, for bringing that into perspective. It's something that we didn't cover. Dr. Toby.
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Zoe. It's a brilliant perspective, frankly. I think the whole point really is for us to continue to think about this as we go through the process of research, because what your mind does not know, you would never chase after. So thank you so much, Dr. Eddie. I think this was I think we did cover the length and breadth. It's an extensive conversation that keeps going on. Something that we may want to talk about someday is informed consent, and really the components, each of them, like Dr. Zoe just talked about one. There's several other components that we need to, that you have to address. But all in all, I think we've done a beautiful job today. Thank you so much. Okay, so do we have any other questions? Anybody else who has any contributions? Anybody wants to say something? This is usually the time where we unofficially catch up and just see, anything about research, where you at, the different groups have anything to say.